I'm excited to present this next panel called Thought Leaders in Islamic Nonviolence. We have Dr. Abdullah al-Hamid who will be talking about Abdullah al-Hamid. We have two presentations on the late Jawdat Saeed, and Dr. Rashid Omar will be talking about Rabia Harris, who is with us today. So it's going to be a very exciting presentation. So without further ado, Dr. Abdullah, take it on.
Panel, and first of all, I told Wallah, and I have to tell you, if you see me inarticulate, I'll just blame it on COVID. The story of Abdullah al-Hamid is a unique story, not just locally in Saudi Arabia. He's a Saudi poet, scholar, and reformer. The background was a combination of Arabic literature and Islamic culture. Abdullah al-Hamid was born and raised in my hometown, Buraida, in Saudi Arabia, and died on April 22nd, April 9th, actually, 2022. Actually, April 22nd, 2022. And the fact of, I mean, the details of his death was just disheartening, because he was in 2012 he was prosecuted by the Saudi prosecutor and charged with fake politicized charges like disturbing the peace and threatening the public order, and the very general things that are used by the Saudi government to prosecute reformers and political activists. And he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And while he was serving his sentence, he fell on the floor of the prison cell, and then later passed away because he wasn't helped. He was not picked up or taken to the hospital for a very long time, although he expressed that he needed a heart surgery, and the doctor told him he needed a heart surgery, but that was postponed and postponed and postponed until he died away. He died and passed away, rahimahullah ta'ala. That's just a summary of how he passed away, but this is just the conclusion of a very, very long history and story of struggle, peaceful struggle, and call for reforms. He's one of the main reformers in Saudi Arabia, and he's being called by so many, including my father Salman Alaoudh and Jamal Khashoggi, the father of the reformists, because of not just the way he practiced reform and called for them, but actually how he theorized concepts of reform taken from Islamic history and Islamic literature. And I'm going to talk about that just in a little bit. But he was one of the main people who were called the constitutionalists in Saudi Arabia, and not just because they are specialized in constitutions, as they have been always. I mean, the people who are specialized in these things are called constitutionalists, but also mainly because they call for a constitutional monarchy in Saudi Arabia, reforming and transforming the system in Saudi Arabia from the absolute monarchy into a constitutional monarchy, where there would be elections, freedom of speech, of course, parliament representative, parliament, and separation of powers, etc., etc., etc. So that was one of al-Hamid's things to push for these reforms and agenda, and to ask for these demands. And there has been a movement that is still alive that is calling for such things. Now, the title of my paper is the constitutional resumption. And why I call it constitutional resumption? Because just talking here in practice, like al-Hamid in practice, he's calling for the resumption of the constitutional guarantees. When he asked for a constitutional monarchy, he's not asking for a complete rupture from the system, because he knows that will be not just very difficult in the status quo and will lose a lot of people and sympathetic people inside, but also will be he'll be alienating people, very powerful people, either from the royal family, from the business elites, from the political elites, and many people within the Saudi society and outside, who think that yes, Saudi Arabia needs to, I mean at that time, needs to have a real and essential changes, but not to the degree that you abolish the whole system and you disband the army and you ask for the fall of the regime, which could mean different things. But in this context, he's avoiding the idea of rupture, and instead he's calling for resumption. He's saying this is the original idea of what the monarchy in Saudi Arabia should look like, or started the path of looking like a constitutional monarchy, but it deviated by time and with absolute monarchs who took the path of the country toward the absolute monarchy instead of continuing that avenue of constitutional monarchy. So he's saying we should resume that path. We are not calling, we're not saying that we're going to invent a new thing. We're not saying that we're going to start a new thing. So it's hard for you to say that, well, we're coming with something new. It's harder for you to say that we are westernized or coming from the West with an idea that is completely innovative and completely innovative in this sense, by the way, is very provocative in the Saudi society, meaning like you're coming up with something that is not built in society. It's something that is not from the environment of the society, but rather something pushed for by the West or by quote unquote foreign agenda. So he is trying to score many goals by calling for, in practice, for this constitutional resumption. Now, I'm going to turn to the other discussion, which is for me a more important discussion, which is why it's a constitutional resumption in theory also, because he, al-Hamid, theoretically, in his many books, by the way, while he in practice, by the way, was imprisoned many times, and the last one was since 2012 until he passed away. He also, in theory, authored many books, including about human rights. And I mean, as far as I know, none of his books or works has been translated into English. But I'm going to translate, or try my best to translate some of the main concepts that he talked about, and he had his theories on in order to know why while it's in practice a constitutional resumption, it's also in theory a constitutional resumption. But the summary is to say that he is basically saying that in theory, democracy and non-violence struggle and non-violence activism and non-violence change is actually not something new in Islam. It's not something that is introduced into Islam. It's something that is genuine. And we are coming, and he went to discuss every major concept in the Islamic politics or jurisprudential politics, siyasa sharia, especially the main concepts that have been widely used or rather misused by the very wing of Salafists. And I don't want to generalize on Salafists, but the very wing on Salafists that is called usually Jamis, who has been using this to, for example, the idea of ta'at wali al-amr, being obedient to the ruler, in order to make everybody submissive, not to question the ruler, not to make him usually, because he's a man, make him accountable, not to have any elections because he has an absolute power, he has an absolute authority, and also not to even talk bad about him, because he is a fate, part of fate, of the God's fate on us that we have to accept and we have to be satisfied about. So al-Hamid came to the idea of the obedient to the ruler and tried to study it. And he talked about two main things. One, about obedience itself and about the ruler. And about obedience. He said when he studied that in jurisprudential politics or Islamic politics, siyasa sharia, he said that obedience, first of all, was never unconditional. It's always conditional. It's part of a larger concept of the contract. And he said the obedience is always not to the man, not to the people, but rather to the principles. And he said that's why it's always being obedient to Allah, being obedient to the Prophet and to Islam is much more superior and important in Islam and in Islamic ethics than being obedient to anybody else, including the ruler. And the obedience of the ruler is always secondary, is always conditional on these first two, is always, under this concept and in a limited scope within the accepted and legitimate authority of the ruler. So he was also talking about legitimacy again. He's saying the ruler now, the second idea of the concept the obedience to the ruler is saying the ruler, it's not just any ruler. First of all, ruler is like obedient to being obedient to the ruler is basically, he said, it's ta'at wali al-amr is never mentioned like this as singular, like ruler in Quran ever. And in any part of hadith, it's always in a context different than we use it today. And he said it's always in Quran rulers, and it's rulers is also like a very light and sometimes problematic even translation of wali al-amr. Some people translate it as wulat al-amr or ulul al-amr, like deciders of the matter. Sometimes people translate it as the guardians. They have, or the guardians of the matter. They have always translated into different ways, but the idea is that we have to understand the Arabic term in order to apply it correctly. And he is saying that, well, it's never singular. It's never ta'at wali al-amr. It's never like obedient to the ruler or to the guardian of the matter or decider of the matter. It's always deciders of the matter. It's always the guardians of the matter. It's always the rulers. It's always plural, meaning that, and that's why الحديث عن الالتزام بالجماعة or being bound by the boundary of the community, being bound by the rules of the community. So it's rather being obedient to the law, being obedient to the principles, being obedient to what the community decide, what the deciders like as a collective agency decides instead of one person. So he kind of is appending the idea of the singular, of the one-man rule, of the one-person rule, of this tyrant oppression or absolute monarch who would have the absolute authority over everything. So that's about this concept. And he came also, and he said, well, you know, when you see how he dealt with this concept as an example, is saying he's not inventing something new. This is from the Quran and Sunnah. This is something very genuine. This is something very culturally planted in Islamic history and have been developed by so many theorists. Al-Hamid is just presented in this contemporary context to allow for interpretation. And he came to the idea of bay'ah. And by the way, like bay'ah has been widely, probably used in every turn of the political change in many absolute monarchies and absolute states in the Arab world and elsewhere, to say that, oh, the people paid allegiance to the ruler or to that man. And he came to the idea of allegiance and the contract of allegiance. And again, he reconstructed in a way that is amazing. He came to the idea and he said, well, first of all, it's a contract. And he said the contract is always, first of all, limited. It's not general. It's not unlimited. It's always the contract is you're gonna abide by the contract according to the terms of the contract. And second, the contract always has terms and conditions in order for every party to follow it and to make this contract operative and to make it more operational and to make it more effective. And he's saying that the contract, the idea of contract is really important. And the second word of the term is the allegiance. And he came to the idea of allegiance in Islam. And he said the idea of allegiance, bay'ah, in Islam came from the word bay'ah, which is sale, basically translated as sale, right? Bay'ah is sale. And he said it's the same contract. It's derived from the same exact word, bay'ah, baya'a, ba'a, bay'a, yabi'a. That's the word, right? Sale, to sale, and he sold. That's the word bay'ah. And he said bay'ah is from that. It's like that's the kind of relationship. And he said it's like and that's why it was derived from bay'ah, because it has similarities in conception and because there are two parties, both of them have something to offer, and one give up something to another in return for something, right? So he said, when he came to the Quran, when he studied Quran and Sunnah, he found something amazing. He said, well, al-bay'a in Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, bay'atan an taradin minkum. Said, sale with consent. That's the Quran. And in Sunnah, the Prophet even made it one step further when the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْبَيْعُ عَنْ تَرَاضٍ. He did not say a sale with consent. He said, sale, he said, there is no sale but with consent, which wants to make the idea of sale is void except in one condition, one main condition, which is to have the consent. And he said that's the idea of sale. First of all, it's between two parties. Second, two equal parties. No one is more superior than the other. And we'll come back later to who can be superior than the other. And third, he said there has to be consent. So you cannot just make people pay allegiance to you. Other than, I mean, and that's why even in siyasa shar'iyya, in Islamic politics, they always discuss the idea of bay'at al-mukrah, the compelled man who, or the people who are compelled to pay allegiance.
Sorry, Abdullah, can you just wrap up because we're running out of time? Thank you.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's, and then the bay'ah, basically, he said, the idea of allegiance has to be with consent. And finally, he came to the idea of ihtisab, and he said they always talk about ihtisab, which is the commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. And he said it's never commanding the right and forbidding the wrong like that. Well, it's widely translated in English. He said commanding the right and forbidding the wrong is commanding the common right and forbidding the common wrong, because in Arabic it's al-ma'ruf, it's not al-khair, it's not al-shar, it's al-munkar. Anyway, I don't want to go into details into this. You can read the paper, but other than that, I'll just end up with this, that he said, al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, commanding the common right and forbidding the common wrong, should apply first to the rulers themselves, which means that you make them accountable, having, them being questioned, and that's part of the commanding the common right, and forbidding them from having corruption, from having absolute authority, from oppressing people, imprisoning them, prosecuting peaceful activists, and etc., etc. That's basically al-Hamid in practice and theory, and that's why he embodies the constitutional resumption in practice by paying a high price for that, including passing away actually in prison, paying for the price of demanding the constitutional reforms, and in theory by trying to say that it's a continuation of a very long and overdue understanding of what Islamic politics should look like. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. Thank you so much.